I'm really thrilled that everybody's here, and that this feels historic for this studio who's worked on projects for many years. But there's this sort of relatively obvious thing that's become clear, and to have the power of brains that are in this room coming together. I was reminded of just now chatting to Colin Ellard, who's here in the front row. By the way, it's thrilling to have you all coming from so far, and Colin's here from Canada, and was thinking about things that seem contentious but are totally obvious. And for example, I think a little while ago I saw an article in the paper saying results of study showing that trees are good in streets. And you're like, really? Has it taken us this long for the totally blindingly obvious thing to have the scientific research around it? So my dream is that it becomes inevitable and obvious and socially equitable for everybody that we must be making places that give joy, and that thing that sounds like it's somehow a luxury or an extra bonus that only rich people should get isn't how we think anymore. And so we're here nearing the end of year one of a 10-year global campaign. And the whole point really is to create a national and international conversation, the conversation that hasn't been happening because there's been an industry that just talks to itself in an echo chamber and actually hasn't been listening to the blindingly obvious things that people have been thinking but haven't dared to really find a voice to say. And so that problem is that the buildings that are boring aren't just an aesthetic thing, that they're bad for our health, and they're bad for society, and they're bad for the planet. And that seems, I even have a slight jitter as I say that, as if I'm saying something that's a bit contentious, but the evidence that you are producing is starting to show this more and more clearly. And so the manifesto really of the campaign is to try to do two things. One is just to sensitize. Doesn't sound like so much, but to sensitize millions of people to this epidemic of emotionally unhealthy environments that surround us all and we've got so used to. The other thing is try to spark a global movement that no longer tolerates soulless, inhuman places. And that's about words, that's about everything that you're all doing. And the principles really that are there embedded in this what we're talking about here is really trying to see emotion as a function when we think about functionalism. It's also to understand that our brains don't need, in the public environment, less. There is a necessary amount of visual complexity that our brains need. And it's some of your research that's teaching us this. The other thing is that when the immediate thought is that what we're discussing together is incredibly expensive. But that's not true. We have the whole of industry available and brilliant minds to make us be able to cost-effectively make places that can engage us. And the most impactful place that feels like it's so often devalued is door distance. Your street view. London spends so much time talking about how tall the buildings should be allowed to be built. And that isn't really the issue. It's what does it do at the street for the millions of us who are walking around on the street? So door distance is another key one of these principles. Another part is just thinking long-term about how do you make a building and a place that someone will give a damn about who you've never met before, who's never been born yet. And what that means, somehow trying to empathize and tune in to some universal things about our humanness. And finally, the public conversation, that somehow or other, nothing will happen if we have an industry that doesn't need to listen to the feelings of millions and millions of people. There is a public conversation about food, and people are really starting to really say, we can't just have this over-processed food. But it took a long time. It's happened in the world of beer, where people they don't want the same processed beer. We haven't got that in the world of buildings. We're kind of decades behind, but we are starting to talk about mental health in society. Footballers are starting to talk about it. Royal family members are starting to talk about it. But it's not in the world of building design, in the mindset of the education system, and there as an ever-present thing that we can be fascinated about. So since we last met, we're in a much smaller group, just wanted to talk about the progress that's been made. And the progress has been much more than I thought that could happen. So first of all, our first 2 property developers have signed up as partners of Humanise, and who are both here, who maybe we'll talk a little bit later about that, which is thrilling because it's what we're talking about surely will bring value to places. And after the digital revolution, our behavior is shifting and changing, and it's logical to make places that people can love and care about. So we've got Situ and we've got Bywater, so we're thrilled with their partnership. Then the second thing is that there's groundbreaking research underway. And we've got the Colin Ellard's Urban Realities Laboratory has been looking at doing special research here in London, in Toronto, analysing buildings, working with 72 volunteers. And I think the results are going to be revealed today. Is that true? Yeah. Maybe we'll get a big shock. I don't know. But we're really excited to see what the outcomes of that are. Then we've started really trying to connect the dots of everything happening across the world, and you all helped us understand what's happening. So really, this is about trying to join together. People have been working in relatively unsupported, in relative isolation, to try and amplify what you're all doing. The other side is architectural education is changing, and we've had some really exciting developments. So at this moment, the Loughborough University team are developing a new module so that the master's degree at Loughborough University in a year from now will have a Humanise module. Then in Colombia, at Universidad EAN, they are developing an entirely new architecture and design school based on Humanise principles, which is amazing. We never thought that this could be leading to actually a whole curriculum being invented. So help us. This needs all our brains. This studio, we don't know how to do a curriculum, but there's some really open-minded people saying, right, we've got to do this, invent the system of education a different way. And then there was also a summer school that happened this year that organised by Loughborough, and something very different for architecture students, to be spending time thinking through their feelings about their response to buildings. And so that was happening in Loughborough. The students also came here, and the amount of engagement and enthusiasm was massive. It really reinforced that this conversation we're having is meaningful and going somewhere. So that was the university team from Columbia, and the dean here all signing up as partners in the Humanise campaign. And finally, the other side of this is really this global conversation. And the global conversation is growing bit by bit by bit, but one really big side to that is in Korea, in Seoul. The mayor of Seoul has asked us and asked me to be the director. Part of that was The book is now being translated into Japanese. The Chinese edition came out. The Korean edition is going to be coming out very imminently. The American edition is going great guns as well. But so finally, where I was half going before, was the Mayor of Seoul has asked me to be the Director General of the Seoul Biennale, which happens, the Architecture Biennale that happens exactly 12 months from now. And of course, the only thing that seemed worth making the whole Biennale about is emotion as a function in architecture. And so all the architects of the city, and it's the biggest Biennale in Asia, will be thinking all around, how do we humanize buildings? How do we understand the buildings that have been built, and how can we harness the research that you're doing and the thinking in this room and the other people that we know of to make cities around us so better. So we're very excited about this, the snowball starting to roll. And so my hope for this today is that it just keeps pushing the snowball. I don't know if snowball's the right analogy, but you know what I mean. We also had, before the elections, we had the Deputy Prime Minister, the shadow Deputy Prime Minister coming along to the studio, engaging, talking about the Humanise campaign, and we also now are in the situation where we have a country that needs to build 5 million more homes, where the conversation is live, active, vital, and the kinds of things that get discussed today could be really impactful, really useful when people are talking about building new towns. Think about the screw-ups that happened of building new towns 70 years ago, and imagine how could we not repeat some of the huge problems that got caused within the great intentions, huge amounts of money that were spent, and so much that got pulled down since then of what got built. So it feels like the right time for this conversation, and the most amazing mix of you all being here. So I'm thrilled and honored, and thank you all for being here.